Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue à la
Hello,
série
everyone.
webinaire du RNB.
Welcome to this series of webinars on nature-based climate solutions.
On va commencer dans quelques
We're going to start
instants.
in a few
Encore des gens
moments. There are still some
nous.
people joining us.
Good morning, everyone. We'll start in a few seconds. There's still a few people that we're letting in, so we'll start shortly. All right, I think most people are in now. If I can get a thumbs up from my helpers that most folks are in. Perfect, thank you. Alors, bonjour et bienvenue à la série de webinaires sur les solutions climatiques.
Hello, welcome to this series of webinar series on nature-based climate solutions. For those who don't know me, my name is Charles Thibodeau. I'm the Nature-Based Climate Approaches Program Coordinator here at the New Brunswick Environmental Network. I will be your host for this webinar series.
For those who don't know me, my name is Charles Thibodeau, and I am the Nature-Based Climate Approaches Program Coordinator here at the New Brunswick Environmental Network. I will be your host for this webinar series. A reminder
that simultaneous interpretation is available. If you need it, please choose the appropriate Zoom icon on Zoom.
A reminder that simultaneous translation is available. Please select the appropriate interpretation Zoom button on the bottom of your screen. If you do not require translation, you can stay here on the main channel with all of us. Also, a reminder that this webinar will be recorded and shared with participants at the end of the series, as well as all the presentations that you will see today in part 2, part 3, and part 4. So I think everybody's here. Let's begin.
I would like to begin by acknowledging that I find myself currently on unceded Mi'kmaq land, but that most of the people participating virtually are also on unceded Mi'kmaq, Wolastoqey, Passamaquoddy, and many other native peoples' lands. This large territory where I am located is called Wabanaki and is covered by the Peace and Friendship Treaties that these peoples first signed with the British Crown in 1726. These treaties did not deal with cession of land and resources, but instead recognized the titles of these people and established the rules for what was to be an ongoing relationship between nations. I would ask that we all take this opportunity to reflect on our relationship with the land and the ongoing process of colonization and decolonization that has a profound impact on the work of activists and environmentalists. The concept of two-eyed seeing, 7 generations planning, and other forms of traditional indigenous knowledge are essential to ensuring a sustainable future for our planet.
For those who do not know where I work, the New Brunswick Environmental Network was established in 1991 and is a communication network that links together some 100 nonprofit environmental organizations in this province. Why is the NBEN working on nature-based solutions? Nature-based solutions promotes our member organizations and their work, especially watershed associations and citizen groups. Also, for a nature-based solution to be effective, communication and cooperation with many different groups, public, private, government, must be at the core of the solution. And also of interest, nature-based solutions are not only cost-effective and last longer than traditional or conventional gray infrastructure, they also address climate change and sustainable development goals. So let's begin part 1 of our 4-part webinar series on the topic, Accelerating the Adoption of Nature-Based Solutions. Thanks again for joining us today. From the beginning of the planning for this web series, we wanted to provide a structured and informative sessions that will help equip participants with the knowledge and tools needed to successfully incorporate and accelerate the adoption of nature-based solutions in their communities. It aims to educate participants on the benefits and implementation of nature-based solutions, provide case studies and practical examples of successful integration of green infrastructure projects, and discuss the financial, environmental, and social advantages of nature-based solutions, including avoided costs from extreme weather events and reduced liabilities. With this in mind, we developed this 4-part online webinar series. Welcome to part 1. So as mentioned, today's part 1, governance and policy alignment. Our 2 speakers today will be Matt Delorme, who is the Executive Director of the AIM Network, speaking about the Climate Resilient Coastal Communities Program, and Lynn Barber from the CSA Group, who is Manager of Strategic Initiatives, and will address the use of CSA water standards in your community. So let's jump right into it with Matt. I have a short bio here. So Matt is the Executive Director of the Atlantic Infrastructure Management Network, AIM Network, supporting municipalities across Atlantic Canada in infrastructure asset management planning. With over 25 years of civil engineering experiences, his work includes integrating nature-based solutions and green or hybrid low-impact stormwater approaches into municipal governance, planning frameworks, and capital decision-making. He works closely with local governments, particularly small and rural communities, to translate resilience goals into practical policy and capital implementation pathways that respect capacity and funding constraints. Through initiatives like the Climate Resilient Coastal Communities Program, his work combines training, risk assessments, and financial guidance to help municipalities build resiliency and position themselves to access federal climate adaptation funding. Before I hand over the virtual microphone to Matt, we will be taking questions. Please hold on to them. We'll go through Matt's presentation. We'll go through Lynn's presentation. And if we have time at the end, we should have a few minutes at the end. We'll bring up any questions at that point. So Matt, over to you. You can start sharing your presentation.
Great. Thank you very much. Just gonna find my share here. Okay, so nature-based solutions and governance. I'm going to talk about that at NBEN's invitation, centered around a project that AIM Network's working on about climate resilient coastal communities. First of all, just an introduction of who AIM Network is for anyone who's unfamiliar. We're a not-for-profit, and essentially what all this says is we do what we need to do to help municipalities with long-term service planning. And we're really interested in governance issues and kind of transparent and accountable decisions in municipalities. So I'm really happy that I have this chance to come chat about it a bit on this webinar. So as an introduction to what the program is here, it's a collaborative project with 6 participants. There's planners, equity people, organizational change, New Brunswick Environmental Network is part of it, Transcoastal Adaptations, and AIM Network. And we're going through a process with 11 municipalities in Atlantic Canada, starting out looking at coastal resiliency through their policy and governance frameworks, looking at how that impacts the climate-ready land use policy and what they need to do with community engagement. On the AIM Network side, we're going through risk mapping and vulnerability assessments. New Brunswick Environmental Network and Transcoastal Adaptations with their Green Shores program is helping advance nature-based solutions in the community. And then we're putting it all together into a capital financing plan so that we can understand how people are going to deliver these projects while still doing things like keeping the snow plowed and the roads patched and the water lines from breaking. So we've been going we've had this project going full speed for about a year and a half, and I thought it would be good to just introduce the topic of why we need governance in using nature-based solutions through some of the challenges that we're running into. First is data inconsistency and changes in risk uncertainty. So even as we've been doing the project, we've seen changes to the IPCC recommendations and projections, updates on climatedata.ca. So it's a shifting landscape that we're trying to manage our decision making in. So we have to adjust our governance decisions to accommodate that, because that's not going to change going into the future. We're still going to see those kind of shifting inputs as we figure out what's happening with climate change. Also, there's different climate approaches across jurisdictions, whether it's the municipality, different in each province, the federal government. A real difficulty in municipalities having the capacity to carry on continuity for long-term planning, which is really important in using nature-based solutions, because they tend to think of the behavior of natural elements over the long term, not just building a wall and hoping it stays where it is for the next 80 years. And a lot of this involves resident communication and engagement strategies. So it's very difficult to make these decisions without understanding what's going on in the community. That part about different climate approaches leads to some confusion around regulatory responsibilities and what you need to do versus what you want to do. And of course, we always run into conflicting priorities because of cost and capacity. Everyone wants to do the right thing, but sometimes when you run into the reality of infrastructure failure or what's going on with the wastewater system this week, it can be difficult to do. And we feel like the solutions to those are through bringing in nature-based solutions into your governance documents. Before I get into how to do that, I think it's worthwhile touching on climate change legislation and municipal risk. So Climate Atlantic had East Coast Environmental Law put this great document together. It's got a really long name at the bottom there, but I would recommend that everyone dig that up and look at it, because it gives you a good idea of how your liability is changing with service delivery in the time of climate change. There's no clear legislated duty to address climate risks. So it's really driven by policy and where you can get funding. However, that doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. Common law negligence liability is evolving, and you should look up a case in Oakville in Ontario that was just settled last year. There was $1 billion lawsuit that ended up, I say only in quotes, only costing the municipality $1 million based on how they manage development in a future floodplain. So these are real risks. There isn't a lot of case law right now, but it's coming. The good thing for municipalities is they do distinguish core policy versus operational decisions. What that means is that if you have the right intention and the right documentation and the right approaches, you're very well protected from things going wrong. If you don't, you're not so well protected, or if you're ignoring risks or sticking your head in the sand or pretending they're not there, you are exposing yourself and councils to liability. So it's important to consider these things, because the world is not what it once was in infrastructure delivery. So what we're aiming for here is a mindset shift. So instead of looking at what is our worst case design scenario that we're going to build something that's going to last for 80 or 100 years, we're thinking about an adaptive pathways approach. How can we work more with what nature is going to do, and how can we adjust to these changing conditions as we find out more about climate change? Instead of looking just at hard infrastructure, we want to start looking at retreat, nature-based solutions, and hybrid engineered natural solutions, looking at to do that with strategic risk management, so we're understanding better, not no risk, but how can we take on risk sensibly and informed. Also looking at long-term service delivery. We've had some really good chats with Charles about what it means to look at nature-based solutions and how it doesn't apply anymore to think about, I have this one property I want to protect, but it's more about looking at things at a watershed and littoral cells on the coastline. So we have to think really differently than we ever have in the past. So how can we do that? A lot of that has to do with bringing use of nature-based solutions into your governance documents. So that can be putting it as a priority in your asset management processes, that you're going to consider that before hard and built infrastructure, that you're going to include that in communication plans with your community. When you're building adaptation plans, that's something we're doing in the CRCC project, is we're prioritizing nature-based solutions above built infrastructure, because they're better for resiliency, and as long as you're planning around what they might do, it's more of a modern approach to dealing with infrastructure challenges. So I'm not going to go through all those plans on there, but you can actually build thinking about nature-based solutions into all of those plans. Just tacked on this slide, I have some examples of where we're seeing this happen. So part of Annapolis Royal's long-term flood planning, they've got two issues going on, more of an immediate issue with storms and wave run-up. And then long-term flooding issues when we start to bring in sea level rise. So they had some questionable community support on building a seawall for long-term sea level rise. So what they're doing in the near term is building a living shoreline to help out break down some of that wave action and avoid that run-up flooding of the properties along the shoreline. CBCL worked with the Department of Transportation and PEI to do this hybrid reef installation. And you can see there the difference between April 2022 and April 23, how much beach has grown. And just to flag with you, Hurricane Fiona happened in between those two dates. So in September of 2022, and they still had that much beach growth in April 2023. And then just from my local area, I'm up in the Annapolis Valley, just north of Kentville. They've actually built through the Community Climate Capacity Program with Clean Foundation, they built a biodiversity strategy that has this clause in there that they're prioritizing using natural restoration and enhancement techniques. So they're actually starting to build it into instructions to staff on how to deal with service and infrastructure challenges. And that's really important because it's easy to not do this stuff unless you're intentionally trying to. So AIM Network, we're asset management people. We like managing assets and we like the processes to do that. So the first thing that we would suggest is start looking at nature-based solutions and natural assets as part of an actual defined service delivery target in your community. And again, I want to make sure that Lynn has enough time, so I won't go through all this in detail, but it's part of the training that we do is how to bring in nature-based solutions as a specific level of service target in your service delivery. And it looks something like this, the same as we do with classic assets, where we say there's a service, get it down through the council commitment, the technical spec, and then some operational decision. The other big piece that we look at in asset management are risk assessment processes, and that leads us to what we're going to do about infrastructure. So this is the one we're using for the CRCC program, and the really important thing from a governance point of view that I would point out today is step 7. When we look at adaptation options, the hierarchy that we've adopted and recommended to the communities we're working with and the way they're looking at deciding what to do is that the first thing they want to do is avoid in risk areas. That's really politically unpopular, but it's the most effective and cheapest solution. But you're telling people who may have very valuable property that they can't build on it, and it's just very difficult to bring in from a governance point of view. Retreat is the next one, is don't rebuild there if there are issues. And if we get into where we actually need to build something, we're intentionally prioritizing a combination of looking at setbacks and nature-based solutions as our first stop as what we're going to do as a protection measure. And I put the setbacks in there because nature-based solutions often include some kind of an accommodation that you're not going to get the same protection as putting down a pile of rock or a giant wall. But you can combine that to so that you don't have to avoid or retreat the type of impacts by using nature-based solutions and just plan smarter. And then the last part, which is, most of my career, which was the first house on the block I stopped at, was built infrastructure, where we look at hard armoring, make it bigger, better, stronger. That's the last thing that we try to do right now because most people don't have enough money to do those things. It has a lot of damage to adjacent properties when we think about littoral cells and watershed scale. So we're really moving in engineering away from what we used to do for most of the past and into a new way of thinking about things. Another thing that we're bringing in as a governance move is that when we make these decisions, we're doing a maladaptation assessment, and nature-based solutions tend to rank very highly in that they aren't very maladaptive compared to doing something like building a wall or putting down a lot of rock. you see the steps that you follow in here. I've put a QR code up if you're interested in this, as well as the website. It's a European Union document. I just haven't found something that's this in plain language, accessible to people who aren't necessarily technical or engineers, and just walks you through a step-by-step question process to see how resilient and or on contrary, or maladaptive your potential solution is. So to make the point, you can actually start in your policies and processes and standard operating procedures, build in that you're going to use these things when making decisions, and that's going to support you in bringing in nature-based solutions, which sometimes isn't the most convenient thing just because people aren't used to it. And that's the real barrier that we need to get past. I'd also like to bring this up. I'm biased because I was involved in helping develop them, but Town of Wolfville has some stormwater design guidelines that have a lot of really good, easy to use application of inland low impact development features, things like rain gardens, retention swales, vegetated boulevards, and it gives some guidance on when and how you might want to use them. And we built it originally to essentially make it easier for people if they wanted to apply these without hiring an engineering company to do it. We put some standard processes and procedures in there, and I wanted to point that out because that's all online and available if you wanted to go grab some information from it. They've also mandated this through their land use bylaw. They've mandated that anyone doing development has to apply these things whenever they're doing development in the town. So I just thought I'd bring that up because that's an in-use example of where a municipality has actually brought that in at a bylaw level. So in the New Brunswick context, since it is New Brunswick Environmental Network, I did a bit of a scan around and, I'm using the best information I find. So I apologize. I am incorrect on this. But I couldn't find any New Brunswick examples where there were actual municipal bylaws mandating specific nature-based solutions, like we're seeing. I shouldn't even have flood risk in there, but mandating NBS solutions, like we saw in Wolfville there, so no mandatory requirements. We have seen a lot of places where municipal policies make reference to green infrastructure. So that definitely exists, but it's non-binding, right? So you run into that conflict between your regular infrastructure work, clearing roads, patching pavement, and how effective it can be without building it into specific strategic documents saying that you need to prioritize NBS over built solutions. So that's a really important piece to go along with that. There's always been the provincial regulations protecting natural features like wetlands. So in a way, that's indirect support for nature-based solutions, but again, without a very intentional governance-based statement, it's easy to skip over that and just say, okay, we're going to avoid the wetlands and just build infrastructure like we always did. There are good provincial definitions kind of saying what that green and nature-based infrastructure is, if you wanted to go check that out. But it's just definitions. There's no mandate there. There's no recommendations. And the Community Planning Act does have an enabling statute, so you can bring in bylaws that require these things if you can make the case through risk assessments, climate adaptation, being more resilient and flexible than hard infrastructure to your council, that you can bring these in to actual bylaw moves. But it does take some thought, it does take community engagement, and it does take somebody being the champion to bringing those into your governance documents. So the key summary and takeaway from this, as Charles said, this is recorded, and Charles, I'll provide you the presentation if you wanted to make it available to people, is that the governance shift that we're talking about can overcome the technical barriers. It's not that we don't know how to use nature-based solution in the engineering and climate adaptation world. It's really getting municipalities to say that they want to use that as their specific level of service and apply those as more of a priority than built infrastructure. And that takes some thinking through on why you would want to do that. But there's a lot of evidence out there that getting into a climate changing world, that these things have a real place in how we manage infrastructure. Communication engagement, you need to keep that at the center of decisions, especially when we look at these things, that nature-based solutions aren't always eliminating risk. What they're doing is slowing it down so that you can more appropriately plan in the future. That's really important to communicate and understand with your community. Policy makes it permanent. It's really difficult to do unless you have strategic documents or something that's instructing staff at municipalities and the engineers that you're working with to prioritize those as solutions to the challenges that you're coming up with. We're big on documentation at AIM Network, so use those level of service and risk tools as communication and guidance tools to understand what you're doing here. Embed tools and resources in your processes. So the ones we've been working with on our CRCC project is the New Brunswick Environmental Network cost benefit tool, transcoastal adaptations, green shores training, and that maladaptation tool. So you can actually bring those in as part of your standard processes, and those are going to start to direct you into nature-based solutions where it's appropriate. At the beginning, I talked about legal risk is real with this, so ignoring the legal or the climate risks and what your potential solutions are. If you can't afford the built infrastructure, that's becoming not defensible as a liability shield if something happens. Number 7 is the most important. You're not alone. There's lots of other municipalities out there. There's NGOs like NBEN, AIM Network. We're here and we're all talking with each other about how to support municipalities in doing this. So absolutely reach out anytime. And if we're not the right people to talk to, we're probably talking to someone who is, and we'll get you in touch with them. So with that, I'll stop sharing and pass it back over to Charles.
I'll unmute myself first.
You're on mute, Charles.
Thanks for that, Matt. There's a lot of good information in there. I think it gives a good blueprint for municipalities to follow. And yeah, I'd like to repeat what you said there. Reach out to us, to AIM Network, to others around, and we'd be more than happy to help you get started onto that. I see there's a question in chat from Mike. We'll hold on to that. I'm going to switch to Lynn now, and we'll get to that question, Mike, at the end here. So let me set myself up here. Our second speaker. Welcome, Lynn. Lynn Barber is Manager of Strategic Initiatives with the Canadian Standards Association. Her primary role is to coordinate and drive cross-sector initiatives, including climate resilience, across the organization. Her previous role involved working with subject matter experts in the development of Canadian and international standards, helping to ensure these standards follow accredited Canadian and international development processes. She managed the development of several national standards in Canada. She has also managed standards projects ranging from geologic storage of carbon dioxide to bioretention systems to flood resiliency. She has a degree in geological engineering and a master's in science and petroleum geology and has over 25 years experience in her field. Lynn has also worked with interested parties on projects across multiple sectors, including water resources and sustainable water management, hydrocarbon exploration and development, forestry, and mining. We're lucky to have you here today, Lynn. I'm going to pass it over to you, and you can start sharing your presentation.
Thanks, Charles. So let me go into presentation mode. Are you seeing the right screen now?
Yeah, everything looks good on my end.
Yeah. Okay, great. So thanks everyone for joining today. Thanks for the invitation. to present to you. I'm going to tell you about CSA Group's nature-based solutions and related standards, and a little bit about a tool we developed, Municipal How-to guide, that supports how standards can be implemented. So I'll tell you a little bit about CSA, who we are, what we do. I'll walk you through these standards, and then tell you a bit more about that guide that I just mentioned, and then finish up with some key takeaways. So who is CSA? So if you're not familiar with us, I'll give you a bit of information, but basically our mission is to enhance the lives of Canadians through the advancement of standards in the public and private sector. So that's why we do what we do. And so we develop all of our standards through subject matter experts like yourselves, through consensus-based and transparent and accredited process. So we're accredited through Standards Council of Canada to develop national standards of Canada. We've been doing this for a long time. We've have over 100 years experience. We have 14 areas of focus, which I'm going to show you in just a sec. But really the heart of our organization are our 11,000 volunteer members that are the subject matter experts that develop the content of the standards, where CSA facilitates the process. So as I mentioned, we have over 14 areas, focus areas. So that ranges from environment and natural resources to occupational health and safety, construction and infrastructure, and quite a number of other areas. So we really go the gamut. We develop under 4 pillars. So this is the standards development organization side. We also have a testing, inspection, certification side. But for standards development, we have 4 pillars. One is standards development, which goes without saying, but we also have research, education, and advocacy. So our research, I mean, it's all about looking for the new standards that are needed today, as well as looking at emerging issues for tomorrow. So all of our research reports that we have are available for free download to the public. And I think we're well into the 130 plus reports across many areas, but I think many of them will be of interest to you, including nature-based solution reports. We also have an education arm, and their job is to develop tools and resources that help make it easier to use and apply our standards. So that could be anywhere from instructor-led training, standard support tools, personnel certification, these kinds of things. So really things to make it easier to use the standards. And then we have our advocacy. So that's about facilitating conversations, raising awareness of our standards as well as emerging issues, and promoting collaboration. Sorry, my transitions are not going as planned today. So we have a public policy group that develops papers on these emerging issues, and they're also available for free download to the public. So now I'll take us through some of our nature-based solutions and related standards, really our flooding standards. So the first two, they're related, are W200 and W01 for the design and construction of bioretention systems. So the bioretention, the design of bioretention W200 is about managing urban stormwater runoff, and it includes things like roles and responsibilities, background investigations, bioretention design, of course, but also operation and maintenance considerations for design, and many others. These are just a few highlights. And 201 was developed as a companion document. One thing that we know is that regardless of how good the design is, without proper construction, these systems are likely to fail. So this standard includes things like contract documentation, construction sequencing, erosion sediment control, material supply and handling, and many other things. But it really does support this systems level approach by construction and design. Our next standard is W218. You may have heard of this one. It's specifications for natural asset inventories. We hope this is going to be the first of a number of standards, but it's about developing a natural asset inventory, but using practices that we're used to that are common for built infrastructure. So hopefully this will make it easier to integrate natural asset management with traditional asset management using existing practices. So it includes documentation, inventory structure, minimum requirements for data gather and processing, and is always looking to this goal of continuous improvement. Two standards that I think you'll be interested in, although they're both in development as we speak. One is W232 and is the management of coastal flooding and erosion using natural and nature-based solutions. Cool. That's a mouthful, but it provides a framework for the assessment, design, and implementation and maintenance of these nature-based solutions for managing coastal flood and erosion risks. And it applies to many different settings: marine, Great Lake coasts, estuarine systems, and also urbanized coastlines is to remote and ecologically sensitive areas. So really has a comprehensive setting of areas that it covers. And W234 is another framework, a planning framework for watershed-based flood and erosion management using NBS. So it's a framework for initiating, planning, and implementing adaptively management. And adaptively is a key word there, managing nature-based solutions, pluvial and fluvial watershed-based flood and erosion management. And so it includes things like selection, design, and implementation. And I believe those will be published later this fiscal or later next fiscal. Okay, now a little bit about our flooding standards. W204, flood resilient design for new residential communities. So we're talking about subdivisions here. So this is about, what can you add to your already good design on your subdivision to make sure that you have the aspects that are going to help mitigate the impacts of flooding. So before the shovel hits the ground, what do you need to consider? And so it takes in a look from two different levels. One is sort of the community or watershed level, where we look at planning principles, look at the characteristics of resilient design, and then go a little bit more granular into stormwater system design, looking at resilient major and minor systems. And if you're at the engineering bent, that I think that will mean the most to you, but that's why they sort of took it at two different levels when they did this standard. W210, prioritization of flood risk in existing communities. So this is about arming decision makers with the info they need to know about where the greatest flood risks are and where the greatest impact is, so they know kind of where to focus their flood resilience dollars. So the standard provides a priority framework, identifies hazards and impacts, and then gives an actual scoring rubric that you can use to sort of rank these priorities. Next standard, we're getting a little more technical here, is W212 on temporary flood protection for protection barriers, flood protection barriers. Looking at the performance criteria necessary to design these barriers. And it includes things like barrier design, supporting documentation, testing environment conditions, hydraulic testing requirements. So on the technical side, but when you need to develop these protection barriers, that it's going to fit in the setting that you want it to work in. And the last standard here is on our standard intensity, duration, and frequency, or IDF, as it's more commonly known. This IDF information under a changing climate. So the objective here is to set out the requirements and guidance for formulating and interpreting IDF curves. So these would be used by water practitioners and describe the likelihood of extreme rainfall amounts. So establishing historical IDFs, deriving new ones, estimating future rainfall amounts, and then guidance on how to apply these curves. So now I'm going to tell you a bit about this resource that we developed for municipalities that tells them how and where to use, how and where they could use the standards. And the whole impetus from this guide came from discussions with municipalities who said, you know, we see the value of these standards, but we're really not sure how to work with them. We're not used to national standards of Canada in this space. So what we did is we worked with 4 pilot municipalities. That those pilots were High River, Alberta, Colwood, BC, Lakeshore, Ontario, and Cambridge, Ontario. And they worked with a consultant, WSP, and gave the consultant all of their strategic documents, so their bylaws, their official plans, their development manuals, these kinds of things. And the consultant took all of this data from the 4 municipalities and did almost a matching exercise and took 7 of our standards and said, you know, where would flood resilient design, where could that fit, you know, in terms of these strategic documents, where could it fill a gap? And they did that for all of the standards and made sort of a generic easy to use guide that was derived from the experience of these pilot municipalities. So what they did was they developed this process. It's actually a very simplistic process that's 3 steps. So the first step is, you know, look at the tools you have in your toolbox, and these tools might be the bylaws, might be the official plans, stormwater management plans, things of that nature. So what's at your disposal? And then look for the gaps where, you know, where are the objectives may be difficult to reach with what you've got in your strategic documents. Where can standards leverage what you're trying to accomplish? And then the last step is about developing guidelines and policies. And this is one of the things that people like most about the guide. There's a couple of things, but one is this survey, essentially, or questionnaire that was developed that said, you know, do you have such and such a policy, and does it include, for example, low impact development or green infrastructure? So depending on your answer, if you said yes, it will take you through a particular set of easy language. So here's a few examples here that just sort of gives how you would word the referencing of the CSA standard, and it does this for all of the standards. So this is if you already have a policy. If you didn't and you said no, then there's sample language throughout the guide that it's a little more comprehensive. You can use this as a model. You can take some of it or all of it, but it gives you a head start on developing a policy and then understanding where these CSA standards would fit. So the guide really has resonated with municipalities. They really like the sort of easy to use visual nature of it. There's not a lot of text. It's supplemented by figures and this sort of very visual format. And they also really love the templated language. Even if you're not going to use the template language in whole, it really gives a municipality a place to start. And in particular, those municipalities that are maybe small or medium, or that really have resource constraints, this kind of guidance is sort of giving them a leg up. And this is a quote from Chris Prosser, who's one of the he's the CAO from one of the pilot communities, and they're using the Municipal How-to guide in in their, they've even referenced the guide itself in some of their policy language, but they're using CSA standards to build up their flood resilience strategy. I don't know if you recall, but in 2013, there was the big flood in Calgary. High River was also hit, and so they're still recovering from it. So this flood resilience is something that is a real focus for them. And I think we've got just the key takeaways. National standards provide consistency, transparency, and quality to nature-based solutions guidance and all our standards and all our guidance. Really, that's what they provide. And they can be used to support policy and regulation. And nature-based and related standards can provide sustainable solutions to climate-related challenges. And so where do we go from here? Well, we raise awareness of these standards and the value they can bring. That's why this is a fantastic opportunity to address all of you, to make you aware of these standards if you weren't already, and just that there is a lot of work going on in this space. We continue to develop NBS standards. As we showed, there's a couple of them that are in development now, and there'll be more to come to support climate-related challenges, and we want to explore new areas where they can bring co-benefits. And so that is it. Thank you.
That was terrific. Thank you very much, Lynn. Yeah, there's a lot of information out there. I see Matt attempted to answer Mike's question on the definition of nature-based solutions. It is a challenge because it's one that, depending on who's defining it, it can change. But with the credibility of the CSA behind these approaches to infrastructure, it's going to help kind of define what that is and hopefully speed up their introduction a little more. There's a lot of guidance documents there, so yeah, I do encourage you to go on their website and download a bunch of stuff, or reach out to Lynn and maybe she can help you move things forward a bit. So I'm going to put my presentation back online. Matt, did you want to add something?
I did, just because I've had some things going back and forth, and Mike actually made a really good point about the idea of greenwashing, using the example of, there's a sand beach and you want to protect it, so you're going to throw down some rock armor and call it a cobble beach. And that's really important, because with these things, like typically when I'm working on them, I'm working with some sort of biologist, because it really gets down to that discussion again about the, watershed system or the littoral scale, and how is that, like, especially when you get into hybrid options that are sort of half engineered and half natural. We really rely on the biologist folks to tell us whether it's doing the thing that we want it to in terms of habitat and natural function, especially when we're operating around already heavily developed areas. It can be tough, but there's people out there who can help with that.
For sure. Thanks for that. It's 12:22, so I'm just going to skip to the end. If there's other questions, Matt and Lynn's emails were shared in chat, so please feel free to reach out to them, or reach out to us here at the NBN, and we'll be more than happy to attempt to answer them, or direct you to folks that surely will be able to answer them. So today's webinar was focused on governance and policy alignment. Both Matt and Lynn have showed us tools and programs that can help integrate nature-based solutions into urban and regional planning, zoning, and climate policies. I'm hoping you can all join us for part 2 next week, where we'll be addressing financing and economic valuation. Our 2 speakers will be Joanna Ekem from the Climate Risk Institute and Michelle Molnar from the Natural Assets Initiative. They will present their work on evaluating the financial value of natural assets and how municipalities can use this information to sustainably fund nature-based solution infrastructure projects. Before we leave the subject of governance and policy alignment, I'd like to highlight some work done by one of NBEN's members and this webinar series co-organizer, Nature NB. If you get a chance, take a look at a map they helped develop along with Birds Canada and Canadian Geographic. You can read the article about this ecological corridor and have a look at the map with the link posted in chat. This important work doesn't only highlight the importance of the Chignecto Isthmus, the bit connecting New Brunswick to Nova Scotia, but it also generates a lot of interesting conversations and possible implications to municipalities and regional land use planning, especially when it comes to wildlife protection and crossings on roads and highways. So thank you for your work, Nature, NB, and Birds Canada, and everybody involved with that project there. If you haven't already done so, follow us on our social media channels and register for next week's event, part 2 of this 4-part webinar series. It's happening next Thursday. The link should be in the chat. If not, you can go to our website and register there. Et finalement, gros merci à André Muse pour son
And finally, a big thanks to André Muse for his interpretation today, and the other on our team, Paul Gregory from Nature Canada, Adam Cheeseman with Nature NB, my colleagues Annika Chasson and May Martinez from NBEN for the technical assistance, and of course to all our speakers, to you all, who all joined us today. Thank you also to the New Brunswick Environmental Trust Fund for helping make this event possible, and to the New Brunswick Department of Intergovernmental Affairs, New Brunswick Bilingualism Support Program for its support. Thanks again. See you next week.